You're listening to Accounted For, the Canadian podcast that explores the intangibles of every career. I'm your host, Daniel Lee. Happy Wednesday. Hey everyone. Hello listeners. This recording is brought to you from a still very, very cold Toronto. God, I hate the cold. Today's podcast is with Martin Hauck, head of talent at Coinsquare. Coinsquare is a cryptocurrency company in Toronto, most commonly known for its cryptocurrency exchange, where you can buy and sell cryptocurrencies like vis-a-vis Bitcoin. But the company has been growing rapidly and adding more services, and so we look at the man who has helped it scale from being around 40 people to 100 plus now, and as it scales to 200 plus in the near future. When I first met Martin, he hooked me really when he told me he dropped out of high school in grade 10, and so I immediately thought, okay, tell me more, I want to learn more. And from there, we started digging into his journey in our brief chat, and I thought, okay, I gotta have you on the podcast, and so that's what we do today. Martin's journey begins with being just, I think, what I would consider to be misunderstood in high school. And he goes through learning business by actually operating a nuts and bolts business, not even the figurative speech way, like he actually sells widgets. And he also ends up changing plans of not going to university to study broadcasting like he originally kind of intended. And then we also talk about how he broke into the tech industry while coming from the old industrial goods background, and how he kind of started by slapping stickers on his laptop and going to tech events. And we also talk deeper into why he does what he does and what recruiting means for him, and how he went about kind of discovering that what he does right now is actually what he was really meant to do. And this was really a fun and fascinating discussion by someone who I consider to be quite well learned and educated, and it's really fun just hearing his kind of thought process and why he did certain things. And I really do hope that you find the conversation as entertaining and also, I guess, like educational as I did, in terms of just seeing someone else's perspective and their journey. And so before we go to the podcast, you know the drill. You like it, 5 stars on iTunes. And you like it even more, leave a review. That helps. And so yeah, support the podcast. You want to learn more about myself, the podcast, and what I do, go to oldmandan.com, look it up. And yeah, without further ado, here is my interview with Martin Hauck. Hey everyone, welcome back to Accounted For. Today on the podcast, I have Martin Hauck from Coinsquare. Martin is the Chief Talent Officer. Hey Martin, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Hi, how's it going?
Good.
I'm not chief yet.
Oh, sorry, director?
I'm head of talent.
Head of talent.
Director, whatever.
Yeah, same thing.
It's all the same.
I feel like it's the same thing.
Yeah.
And for the audience who are not familiar with the crypto world, could you explain what Coinsquare is and what the company does?
For sure. So Coinsquare is Canada's leading digital currency and cryptocurrency platform. It's an exchange where I, as an individual, if I was interested in purchasing cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, Litecoin, Ethereum, Dash, Ripple, any of those currencies, I would be able to create an account, log on, fund my account with Canadian dollars from a bank, and then begin trading my Canadian dollars for respective cryptocurrencies like the ones I mentioned.
Got it. And the timing is quite timely in that I'm sure you've seen in the news about the founder, I think, of the exchange dying and the whole exchange losing a bunch of money because it didn't have passwords.
Yeah, so
yeah,
Quadriga,
that would happen, right?
Yeah. Quadriga is the exchange you're talking about there.
Yes.
Which was sort of the first to Canadian market, or one of the more popular ones that exists theoretically, and there's a ton of controversy surrounding that exchange right now.
Yeah. but we don't. There's no same risk at all for Coinsquare, right? There's no founder with a master password.
No. We've taken care of that a long time ago.
Yeah.
And hedged our risk against multiple people, so there's no one individual with the passwords, and we've got backup plans on top of backup plans. So
yeah, it seems quite contrary to how blockchain essentially is supposed to work. It's decentralized network, and then you have one that's centralized.
It's all centralized in one person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And something I noticed when I looked at your Twitter profile is that you are I don't know if it's a self-proclaimed, but certified avocado expert. How big of a fan are you of avocado?
I'm. If you're looking at opposites, I'm as much of a fan of avocados as much as I am a fan of people calling themselves visionaries or coming up with like really ridiculous things. So that's sort of like my troll of folks that call themselves like, well, I mean, even in the crypto space, like everybody and their brother seems to be a cryptocurrency expert the second the crypto market exploded and they started putting that in their profiles, and then you talk to them, you're like, oh, so tell me more about this, and then it's just a surface level sort of thing. There's a ton of great smart individuals out there, but typically they're not labeling themselves as such, and it's more underground and more low-key on their profiles. From a recruiter perspective, I'm talking
right
from the lens of somebody that's spending 99% of their day on LinkedIn and Angel List and stuff like that.
Yeah, I remember when crypto exploded. I think I was in the hedge fund world then, and so all my friends would start messaging me and saying, "Hey Dan, so you invest crypto? What do you think?" And then I tell them, "I have no idea. We don't touch that." And they go, "Okay, then what about marijuana?" I'm like, "We don't touch that either."
Yeah, it's a crystal ball.
Yeah,
I mean, theoretically, everything's lined up for long-term success, but you really can't tell what's going to be happening.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And so I kind of want to take things back way into your past.
Sure.
What triggered?
Are you gonna have sound effects?
No.
Okay.
My audio technicals are not up there yet, and I don't consider myself too much of a creative artist like others. But I wanted to ask you about where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Guelph. I was born in Toronto. Born and raised in Toronto until I was 5, so maybe not raised, and then we moved to Guelph. So I was in Guelph from 5 to 18, basically.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what did your parents do then in Guelph?
Parents have always been involved in either photography or my mom she's been focused on sort of medical imaging and working in the hospitals as a digital specialist, basically. Wow. The person that makes sure that doctors can do presentations, and she's in the AV room essentially. So
quite a visual upbringing.
Yeah,
I guess.
Yeah. I've always joked that I'm the capitalist of my family, because both my mom and dad are like avid photographers, and my sister's an artist, and I'm the only one that cares about the business news and whatnot, and they're way further removed from that. So. Mm-hmm.
And so did you have that kind of business love like at an earlier age? Like what did you want to be when you were, 12, 13?
I wanted to be a talk show host when I was 12 and 13.
Really?
Yeah. I thought Dave Letterman was hilarious at an early age. So I always stayed up late to watch him, and didn't really like Jay Leno that much, and Craig Kilborn and all those late night talk show hosts. Conan O'Brien, that sort of thing. Yeah. So I don't know how I got to where I am today. But this is the closest thing as far as recruiting and interviewing people. That's the closest thing to late night talk show host without moving to New York or LA, I think.
Where do you see the similarity? Why do you say that?
Well, as a talk show host, you're interviewing people. You're learning about their lives. You're making a joke every once in a while. And yeah, I feel like that's the same thing as interviewing people. You kind of learn a bit about them, see where they're coming from, help them make a few connections. Talk show hosts help, celebrities plug their latest and greatest project or movie, and I connect the dots. So yeah.
Gotcha. And when we first met, I think you might have actually started off
the full conversation with, oh yeah, so I dropped out of high school at grade 10, and then yada yada yada, I'm here now. And so I think that kind of caught my eye immediately, and it's been, I think, a good way to look at your kind of career journey, where so you dropped out of high school in grade 10, and then you go into the full industrial goods space, and so from what I gather, you've been selling nuts and bolts for about 6 years, and then you went into industrial goods recruiting for other people who can do that.
Yeah.
And then you went into the tech foray, went to Wrangle.io, StackAdapt, and now at Coinsquare. So take me back to that moment of when you were in high school. How did you decide, and what kind of made that apparent for you that you should leave?
It wasn't. I wasn't sitting in like the cafeteria drinking coffee, or probably not coffee, but like I wasn't drinking a pop and eating a piece of pizza in the cafeteria saying, okay, I'm going to drop out. It wasn't like a single individual incident, but there were a lot of small incidents that just made me realize that I wasn't built to succeed in high school. Not necessarily from like a learning standpoint, just from like a focus standpoint. When I'm doing something, I want to be laser focused on that. And I found the classroom setting really distracting in the sense that, in grade 10, I had people like sitting beside me in math class, like rolling joints in their math textbooks. And I was like sitting beside them, and like my mind was blown. I'm like, we're in class and you're doing this stuff, and I'm trying to learn how to do algebra, and you're doing this. And because I would be sitting close to them, I'd get in trouble for it. I was like, this is bullshit.
Yeah.
So, like, that's one sort of memory that sort of stood out to me. And then I think there was like a mix-up where the guidance counselor actually brought me in, and I feel like her paperwork was like mixed up, and she was supposed to be talking to a student about skipping class and heading out across the street and smoking weed in the park. And I'd never done any of that stuff, but she was sitting there accusing me, and I was like, no, it's not me. You've got the wrong person. I don't even know why I'm here. I've never been to the guidance counselor, like, what's going on? And that sort of like set off a bunch of events where I'm like, this is ridiculous. Nobody's taking me seriously. Nobody's listening to me. I'm being accused of things that like aren't things that I've done. And that sort of made me start questioning a lot of the authority that was coming from school and just the outside world and society as a whole. So I stopped showing up to school and went on this like 5-month battle with my parents, where it was just like every morning my mom would come downstairs and be like, go to school. And like she would argue and try to get me to go to school for like the first half hour to like hour, and then she'd have to go to work, so I'd win, and then I would stay home, watch cartoons and do my own thing for 5 months until I got bored. And then it got to the point where they're like, well, you need to get a job, so it's either school or a job. And in between there, I convinced my parents that I would be able to drop out of school if I did homeschooling. And there was the Independent Learning Center at the time, so I did a history course was my first course, and it comes in 4 booklets. So it's like 25% of your class gets mailed to you, and then you fill out all the work, you read all the textbook, and then you mail it back and they mark it. And I did my first book, and I got 100% on it. I'm like, okay, I'm smart. I can absorb information when I'm in the right setting. That sort of gave me the confidence that I don't necessarily need to worry about school, because I thought, like, I'm learning 100 different things here. I don't even know what I want to do yet. Why don't I just go get a job, get paid, and learn the world on my own way? And I got a job.
Gotcha. And so after that first history booklet, you just stopped doing any more?
I was like, this is fine.
Yeah,
like, you could give me a book on science or space or politics, and if I have the information there, I know how to retrieve it, and I know how to spit it out so that I remember. Or I was good at like writing, creative writing, spelling and grammar and all that fun stuff. So it's that stuff seemed to come naturally to me. And I was just like, if I'm given information, why don't I learn the things that I want to learn versus sort of being served like all these things that you don't necessarily get to choose.
And what kind of stuff were you drawn to?
Well, at that time, I wasn't really mature enough to like focus in. I was drawn to computers a little bit. A friend of mine, his dad, worked at IBM in Toronto and commuted back and forth between Guelph. And I was one of the first kids to get a computer. I was one of the first kids to get a CD burner. I had a little CD burning business where my dad's friends would give him lists of songs and I would download it from LimeWire and Kazaa and Napster, and then I would burn a CD for them, and then the next day I'd get like $10, and the CDs were like $1 a piece or something like that. So all I had to do is download music. But that was like with a 56K modem, and it took like 20 minutes to download one song.
Yeah, I remember those times too. But I remember it was crazy when it happened, though. I was like, wow, it's a plain CD, and now I have music in it. I have movies in it. I remember I used to label all my CDs with like movie titles and keep them all in like a big case with other CDs as well. And so you went into then selling nuts and bolts.
Yeah.
How'd that go? Did you just try to find any job possible?
Yeah, that was an any job possible situation.
Yeah.
So the Youth Employment Services, or the YES program that Ontario sponsors, was how I got my first job, my first real full-time job with TSC stores. And that's just like Home Depot for farmers, basically. They sell a lot of farming equipment as well as anything else you could get at Home Depot. And they subsidized my wages for like 6 months. And that was a program that the government was doing because I was a dropout. And they ended up hiring me on full-time. I worked there for 3 years. And that was just because I needed to get a job and I needed to show my parents I was doing something with my life at that time. And I then moved to Toronto with my girlfriend at the time. She was going to York U, Seneca, York U Seneca campus, and she was taking radio broadcasting. And from there, I just went to a job fair, brought my resume. I was the only person that was wearing a suit. And there was a person at a company there who was at the job fair. I gave him my resume. He's like, well, you're the only person that's looked professional and actually dressed the part for today's event, so I'll call you next week. And I ended up getting a job with them. And that was like my first 6 years of like basically learning business, how to run a small business under the umbrella of a large organization, basically.
And that was Fastenal.
That was Fastenal, yeah.
I remember that caught my eye because I love the company Fastenal. Like, I love the founders and their story. So as an investor, it's actually one of the darlings where you read the whole story, and it's just a fascinatingly family-run business that's just so well managed. Yeah. Did you feel any of that?
Oh, yeah. Like, so I started as a driver. But when you get into the management track, which is pretty early on, they basically take people straight out of school and put them into sort of like an accelerated branch manager program where talented individuals get to fly to Minnesota. It's not Florida, it's not LA, it's not California or anything like that. But they fly you to their head office in Winona, Minnesota, and they treat you to like 5 weeks of training, treat you or provide you with 5 weeks of training. So I was there for 5 weeks learning literally everything to do with like profit and loss balance sheets, how to run a business, what the business strategy is, where they went from like, I think it was like 1976 when they started, or 1967, and all the way up to where they'd been at that point. And, you know, they had this like model where they used to sell to customers in a certain way, and then they created another methodology, and I learned so much there. And it was like a class of like 40 students, and from all over the States and Canada. I was like one of 3 Canadians in the class of like 40 people, so that was really an interesting experience. And I was like 20, 21 at that age. So yeah.
And did everyone else have like university degrees? And
yeah.
But I guess like I feel like you probably got all the business education you might have needed just from that experience alone.
I did. I started off as a delivery driver, and then from there they were going to close down one of their locations in North York. It wasn't performing well. They're like, the store's been doing $7,000, $6,000 in sales every month for the last like 5 or 6 months. Haven't been able to find a good manager. We're probably going to shut it down. Either you turn it around or take care of it until we're actually ready to shut it down. And over the course of 3 years, we took that from like $7,000 a month to about $250,000 a month.
Wow.
Yeah.
What was the big strategic move there?
There was no strategy. Everything was just figuring out as you could go along. It kind of boiled down to the people, which is ironic, I guess, based on this conversation. But like, it definitely mattered. Like the people that we hired, or my district manager hired, and that I hired, helped shape that location and helped. We had some people that brought on some really big accounts that nobody had ever even knocked on in that area, which was really surprising. And that ended up bringing in a lot of revenue for us and sort of turned things complete 180 for that location. So
yeah, like when you're telling me about that, I had kind of like the scene from The Office kind of playing in my head. Like maybe like a person like Dwight came in and started getting all the big accounts.
Yeah.
And so how did that transition now from practically operating a small business to recruiting happen? Like, why not just go down more of like the business owner path?
Yeah. So I left Fastenal to join a small like family run fastener business with someone that was at Fastenal previously. So he's a assistant manager that I worked for like 5 or 6 months. And I was sort of interested in like, hey, I want to run my own business. Why not do this myself? And that's where I sort of jumped over. And then I learned that it was more of a family-run business, and the family will always come first. And I was sort of the outsider in that environment. Great company, great people. And then I left to go to essentially Fastenal's competitor, HD Supply, and I was a buyer there. So I was buying the stuff that I was selling previously. So that was more of like a head office corporate environment where I had a cubicle and all I was doing was looking at spreadsheets all day long, and I was figuring out where do I buy the next 100,000 widgets from.
Like literally widgets.
Literally widgets. Yeah. Literally widgets. I love when people use that example. I'm like, oh, there's very different names for widgets. It's a different purchase order.
Let me teach you.
Yeah. So while I was there, a recruiting company called me up and said, hey, I've got an interesting question for you. And I was like, okay, is it going to be the same question that you always ask? Do you want to go to like the other competitor in the space? And they're like, actually, no, we want you to join our firm and we want you to be a recruiter. I'm like, oh, this is actually interesting. They explained it to be incredibly lucrative. And I was at a time in my life where that was really appealing. And I said, why not? And I took a jump for it and ended up with Lock Search Group. And I spent 2.5 years with them learning how to recruit. And I had a mentor there who basically showed me the ropes of he'd been doing recruitment for like 8 to 10 years at the time. And I basically learned everything he did. And he showed me how he operated and how he kept himself organized and showed me the dynamics and the psychology behind it. And I learned a ton of things in a very short period of time there. And then ended up deciding to start my own business. Yeah.
And during this whole time, like, when you mentioned how your girlfriend was studying broadcasting at York U, and given how you wanted to be a talk show host, did you ever have inklings or just thoughts of maybe I'll go back to school, maybe I'll do broadcasting? Did that ever come up, or was it just
Yeah, the plan originally when we moved to Toronto together, I think when we were like 18, 19, was that she would finish school and then we would swap. So I was working and she was going to school, and then she would start working, and then I would go to school and I would figure out what I wanted to do with my life because I felt like I was ready to go back. That never ended up happening. And I did kind of think, hey, maybe I want to do radio broadcasting, but that never. I was so excited and engaged in like learning business and learning how to run a branch for a large corporation but it was super entrepreneurial. It literally felt like I owned the hardware store down the street. And that captivated me, running and operating a business from head to toe and trying to make it profitable and calling customers and doing accounts receivable and managing inventory and doing deliveries and all that fun stuff. Like it was just complete hands on deck, and I loved it. So I wasn't really thinking very much of going back to school, to be honest with you. Yeah.
And then you said how after learning the ropes of recruiting that you went over to start your own business. Was that then before going into Wrangle.io?
Yeah. So before I joined Wrangle, basically a few of the folks that came before me at the firm started their own recruiting businesses. And the way the compensation structure there is set up, it's not like 100% commission. It's different, but it's essentially that. So if you don't get anyone a job, you're not essentially getting paid. And from there, I thought to myself, I could do this on my own. Why not? And I had a few slow months at the firm, and we ended up parting ways. And I remember I was watching Jerry Maguire with my now wife, new girlfriend at the time. And I was like, just the entire movie, minus like the romance part of it, but the entire movie of like getting back to the basics, because the firm I was with, there was always like a set of numbers, and you needed to have a ton of clients on board, and you needed to have a ton of candidates. And my whole mentality is like, why not focus in on one or two clients? And the movie's premise is like, just have one client that you give all your attention, all your love to, and that'll sort of spin out. So my whole mentality was like, I want to start my own recruiting firm, and I want to have like one or two clients as opposed to like 10 or 15. And I just want to close those roles and move on to the next one, so that everything that I work on is complete. I'm not leaving anything hanging. And so I started it. Like after that movie, I was like, yep, I'm going to do this. That was like that was a snap moment. Like I paused the movie. I'm like, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to start my business. She's like, okay.
In the mid-movie, she goes, oh, cool.
Yeah, I think she fell asleep. Like she falls asleep through every movie. So yeah.
That's exactly like my girl. She fell asleep yesterday watching the Spider-Man movie.
Yeah.
But I have those two where we'll watch something and I'll pause Netflix and say, I just had an idea.
Yeah.
And so, how did that feel though when you went off and then you kind of parted ways? Like you were kind of this kind of rock star at Fastenal, grew this huge business, and then you did recruiting, and I'm sure you did well there, and then you did well enough to go, all right, let's go and like do our own thing. But how did you handle that? I don't know. Like, did you have any doubts like of your own capabilities or?
Yeah, no, I had a ton of doubts. I mean, parting ways is a nice way of saying getting fired. I got let go, and that was really jarring for me. I remember at the time we were looking to buy a house, like seriously looking to buy like a condo at the time. And the day it happened, I remember talking to the person that ended up being the person that let me know that we're no longer going to be working there. We went downstairs for lunch together, and I had a copy of like a condo magazine where you're like looking through, and he's like, oh, what's that? I'm like, oh, just thinking about buying a house, like taking the big step. And then 5 hours later, it's like, peace, you don't have a job kind of deal. And that was strictly because the agency recruiting business is very intense in the sense that like you have 2 or 3 slow months where you don't place anybody, and it's out. And everybody knew that. Like when I was hired, like 5 people started with me, and after 6 months, I was one of 2 people still there. So it was a good high performance environment that really kind of was also similar to sort of Fastenal. Like it was a high performance environment. So I've always thrived in sort of those environments where there's a ton of pressure to perform, to deliver. But at the time when it happened, I was not petrified, but I was definitely scared, completely uncertain of anything, and like ton of confidence shattered. But I also knew that the people that were there before me had done the exact same thing. So part of me was like, why not? Dropping out of school hasn't turned out to be as catastrophic as I had anticipated, or as the movies have made it out to seem like, or as like the old wives' tales where you drop out of school, you're going to become a homeless junkie. That didn't happen. So I said, why not? And gave it a go. So I spent about a year and a half working out of the Center for Social Innovation, which is sort of like a socially conscious co-working space in Toronto. It has 3 locations, and the energy there was fantastic. Like all these people doing all these incredible things. I was actually the odd person out because I was more of like still doing like overly capitalistic stuff, and other people were like, I'm helping save the world. What are you doing? I'm like, oh, I was just a recruiter recruiting for the industrial space by myself. So I didn't necessarily belong there, but the energy and the vibe of entrepreneurship at the Center for Social Innovation was incredible. And it really got me excited. I always wanted to get into tech. Yeah, I was the first person to have like a BlackBerry at Fastenal out of like the entire district. And like 3 weeks later, all the district managers was like, I got one too. And I'm like, it's great, right? We can answer emails while we're driving. It's terrible. That was before texting and driving was a bad thing, but like,
and
yeah.
You have BBM and
BBM, all that fun stuff. Yeah. So I'm an early adopter. Like I was always interested in tech, but never got to work in it. And that's sort of how I got into Wrangle.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And I imagine that the Center for Social Innovation, like they have from what I know, they still have like a bunch of like tech companies part of that community as well. So was that your kind of step into like actually getting the confidence to say, I'm gonna jump now?
No. The first thing, I think before, I was going to meetups while I was a recruiter, and I wanted to learn more about the tech space. So I was like, went to meetup.com, looked up tech. I had no idea what I was doing. So I show up in like a suit because my firm was like a suit and tie kind of place. And I show up to this tech meetup and all these people are wearing hoodies and everybody's got stickers on their laptop. And I didn't talk to anybody, and people were drinking beer at 3:00 in the afternoon. And it was just like, what is this world? Because I came from like the power business suit space where it was just like, right? And it was just really jarring to me. But I remember going to this Product Hunt meetup. Product Hunt's an awesome website, and they had a TO chapter basically, or Toronto chapter. So I went to it. I think it was at like the Highline Beta office on King, just around the corner here, their old one. And I remember Ben Yoskovich, who was running Virage Sale at the time, Michael Katchen, who's the CEO of Simple now, and someone else, I forget who, so that's probably terrible, but that was the first meetup in Toronto. And
that's a good speaker base.
Yeah, and they were like, it was before any of them had blown up.
What year was this around?
2011, 2012, maybe. I think.
That like, I still consider then that time to be. It was before it got cool to join tech.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I remember because 2010 was when I started university, and even then people were like, oh yeah, it's called RIM back then. BlackBerry was called RIM, and it was like people were like, oh yeah, that's a good company, but I don't ever want to go to tech or Silicon Valley. I don't know, like Facebook, you really want to work for social media. It wasn't that big, and then 3-4 years later, it's huge. Everyone wants to work at tech. But sorry, I interrupted you.
No. It's I think it was a little bit like it wasn't. I definitely wasn't an early adopter in the sense that like it had already been established. I think FreshBooks, that's the darling of Toronto. Achievers, my buddy was working at Achievers. He was telling me all these crazy stories of like what the tech world looks like, and so I was late to the party, and I didn't feel like I was necessarily invited or didn't know how to get in. But I remember specifically when I had my own recruiting business and I was focusing almost exclusively on industrial clients, I started putting stickers on my laptop. I'm like, this is how I'm going to get in. I'm just going to look the part. So I put a product hunt, sticker on my laptop, and I started following tech people on Twitter, and I started learning the jargon. And then, Brianna from League, she's their VP of product now. She was at that event as well, and she was talking about waterfall and agile. And I had I'd never, why are these people talking about waterfalls? How does this have anything to do with tech? And she's like, waterfall methodology is and agile is so much better, And I was so out of my element. It made no sense.
Oh, it's so funny that you say that, because so we're in the Coinsquare office, and as I told you before in our first conversation, one of Deloitte Consulting's big project was here, and this is where I learned waterfall and agile methodology.
Yeah. It's still waterfall's not necessarily bad. Apparently, it's just you have to use the right methodology for the right project. So it's not bad, but I think tech has really adopted the agile space. So anyways, they were talking about it at that meetup. So I was like, I was just consuming the information. I didn't know how to spit it out and make sense of it, or I didn't know how to deliver it in a way so that when I call up tech-based clients, they would trust me. But going to those meetups and talking to people at those meetups was really helpful. And then I ended up going to a few tech TOs. That was incredible. And just the energy in that room was yes, you can transition your career and you can transition your work into this space. You just have to continue kind of going to these things and showing up to these events and figuring it out.
And how did you figure it out?
I kept calling, I was doing sales calls. Fastenal taught me to be relentless. I would call a customer 100 times over the course of 6 months to get their business for nuts and bolts. I really want that nut and bolt business. I'm going to hound you until you give me that opportunity. And I did the same thing with tech companies, and I ended up 500px or 500 Pixels was the first company that gave me an opportunity to work on one of their tech roles. And it's all contingency. They're not paying me up front. I actually have to place somebody. And I didn't know what DevOps was at the time. And they were like, we really need a DevOps person. And it was a very startup-y kind of meeting where it was they had 10 minutes for us, and I expected a full-blown hour. And that was a ridiculous assumption that I made. And we sat, we sat in this classroom. The office was gorgeous. And then we had 5 minutes. She was like, yeah, we need a DevOps person. We've been looking for DevOps for a long time. Can you do that? I'm like, yeah, whatever you need. And I was trying to do a full-blown job description. Didn't get any of that. She's like, here's our posting. Send me the contract and we'll go from there. I'm like, okay, I have a lot more questions. So then I created this. I was trying to copy my mentor at the time or previously, and he had this really creative way of writing job descriptions and telling a story. Mark Kirpin's his name, and he's got a recruiting firm called Match and Fable, and he still does it. He still has a completely irrelevant, almost relevant story tied to the job posting, but he gives you a quick history lesson, and then he usually says that has nothing to do with this role, except we need so and so. So I tried to copy it and sort of put my own spin on it. So DevOps, the way I understood it, was essentially somebody that made sure that the site never went down. And my job posting take on it, I created a creative title, which was a terrible idea at the time. I called it the Site Explosion Prevention Officer role. So I called it the SEPO. And I had this, and I was my website was pretty tight. I was using Squarespace at the time. And I had this picture of a guy in a bomb suit walking up to this canister. And I was this is my marketing for this role. This is how I'm going to get. I didn't place the role. I didn't get any candidates. Nobody applied to the job. It was a terrible, epic fail. And I didn't end up placing that role, but I was getting closer to where I wanted to be. And then I ended up reaching out to Wrangle and sending their VP of People, Roop at the time, an email, as well as Avery Francis. And I sent Roop a really long email, and then I sent Avery a really short email. And we laugh about it now, but it was it was a cringeworthy message to both of them because it had nothing to do with actually recruiting. I think I sent the message at like 2 a.m. out of desperation. I'd had too much coffee that day, and I was like, I'm gonna get really creative and just like talk about the weirdest stuff. And they ended up reaching back out to me, and they're like, we're not gonna use your services, but we're hiring somebody and we'll train you to be a tech recruiter. I'm like, this is great. You know what? I'm not interested in recruiting for like an industry that's shrinking anymore. I want to work in tech, so let's do this. And that's how I got into tech.
Gotcha. Do you remember what you wrote in that short email to Avery?
So I was playing off the idea that they probably worked closely together, and I was hoping that she might be working beside him, or like go into work the next day and say, hey, did you get a weird message from Martin? Because I said to her, I'm like, hey, you, just a heads up, I sent Roop an email. You should check it out. Or you should ask him about it. And it was just really kind of, I look back on it with cringe. There's nothing bad about it. It was just like, it could have been worded differently. So that was her impression of me, and the whole time she was like, no, I don't want to work with this guy, he's a weirdo. And then Roop was like, no, give him a shot, like look at the email he sent me. And I talked about like cookies, NASCAR, conspiracy theories, everything. It didn't make sense, but I read his article on his profile, and I felt like that would resonate with him, and apparently it did. And then when it came down to like actually doing the work, they had like a really comprehensive project that I like spent all weekend trying to make sure that I killed. So
yeah, it worked out.
It worked out. Yeah.
And then after that, you were able to continuously progress into the tech world and go through that recruiting route.
Yeah.
And throughout that journey, like I think it's kind of on an overall spectrum. Was it like was it smooth sailing once you got into tech, or what kind of like bumps and bruises?
Nothing smooth sailing, I don't think. And if it is smooth sailing, you're probably bored. And if you're okay with that, cool. But I'm not. Like, it's got to be bumpy. I have to be learning something. If tech was new for me, so that was great. Working at Fastenal, like, you planned your career moves very strategically. You're like, oh, this branch isn't really doing so well. I'm going to buddy up with this district manager, so if something happens to that manager, maybe I can get a shot at taking that branch over. Whereas like tech moves so quickly that you get bumped into roles that you aren't necessarily ready for, and you just have to learn how to do it. Otherwise, you're not going to be there for very long. So it was very, it was definitely my pace. It was definitely my pace that I preferred. So.
And you said you will always have lots of bumps and bruises and lots of obstacles. Is there like a big one that pops to mind that was just like this huge mountain and you felt like, shit, how am I going to climb this? And then you eventually overcame it.
Yeah. I think just learning how to, like, the biggest obstacle is recruiting engineers and developers and people in the tech space, especially if you have no business doing that. So the first 3 to 6 to 9 months with Wrangle, working closely with Roop and Avery was incredible, because they were providing so much feedback, and like it was like every day I'd be like, this is what I'm going to send this person, what do you think? And that was like me stepping into the ring with like a heavyweight boxer, and like me being like a flyweight, and them just demolishing me. Like, don't say this, you should say this. Also, you don't know anything about this, so go have coffee with this developer and learn more about that. And it was just this constant like barrage of training, but trial by fire. And I would say like getting my feet wet in that space was probably one of the bigger challenges that I've gone through. Yeah.
Would you say is there like a big kind of like mistake or like failure that comes to mind that kind of shaped how you change like opportunity sets? Or
one lesson I think I've learned over the last 3 years, I enjoy being a people pleaser, but I know that is actually probably my biggest weakness at the moment, and I'm trying to change it. And I think being able to say, based on your intuition, based on actual data points, and coming back to someone more senior than you and saying, no, actually, this is, I believe X, and you believe Y, and I need to convince you that X is right, versus just taking Y at face value and saying, oh yeah, you've got 10 more, sorry. You've got 10 more years of experience. I'm just going to trust what you say, versus actually I've been doing what I do for quite some time. You should trust what I say as well. So there's, as the student, I think the student mentality is like constantly taking what your teachers are saying at face value and accepting that, and then forgetting to sort of act as sort of an advisor in that shift. That's been the biggest lesson that I've been learning in the last, I'd say, 3 years, where now I can put myself in a position of, okay, this is actually how, this is actually like, no, that decision's wrong, and getting comfortable with disagreeing with people on their mentality or whatever it is that they're doing in order to actually have the best outcome for the business.
And yeah, I remember how, I think a very memorable thing for me was when we met, you were telling me how because of my age, I would get a lot of, it won't be that easy just because it's going to be hard to get people to convince people who have grayer hair that I know what I'm talking about. And you said from your experience, it's been the case. And so like, how frequent has that been? Like, you're definitely, you know, a young guy too, so.
Yeah. That's been the challenge that I've seen, is that I was always the youngest person at the table. So if I would come forward with an idea, it's like, cool story, bro, but there's 10 other people in this room with, you know, double the amount of experience. Maybe we're not going to listen to that advice. And that's a tough mountain to climb. That's a tough conversation to have. It's almost like, I feel like it's, and I'm not proposing that I'm right all the time, but in the event where I have a good idea, and it's sort of like everybody knows and has that good idea, everybody has that gut instinct to say like, we are doing things the wrong way and we need to change. And it's just being able to listen to that voice and then being able to advocate for that voice inside your head with whomever you're talking with. Almost like a marketing campaign, in the sense that like you almost have to see something like 7 times before you truly remember it from a marketing perspective. I feel like that's sort of the same thing. You have to constantly, like I have this habit of like saying things once and assuming people get it and assuming the message has been heard. And there's so much stuff going on in a startup that just because you've let someone know something once doesn't mean that it's resonated with them. It doesn't mean that they're going to remember it tomorrow. And really, basically, if you have a strategy, if you have a plan, if you have an idea that needs to get executed on, you need to campaign. You need to have your own personal marketing campaign. If that's, you know, sending out a Slack message, then following up with an email the next day later, and then following up with, you know, an announcement at your next company stand-up, and just constantly pitching that message versus like, hey, this is what I stand for, this is how we're going to operate, and then sort of letting it needs to be a constant reminder, almost an alarm clock, so to speak. And that's what's been helpful for me, and that's what I've started doing. So,
and have you found that your unorthodox background of being, you know, not finishing high school and being in industrials has kind of hit you with like negative stereotypes? Have you ever experienced it?
I come with a lot of privilege on top of that, so I'm a straight white guy. So there's a ton of privilege that comes with that. So I haven't seen a lot of those barriers because of being a dropout. And I don't necessarily announce it. You know, I don't walk into a room and say, actually, I used to. I was like, let me get this off the table because I'm really nervous about you asking. And now to the point, for me, it's become irrelevant based on experience. So it was terrifying when I first started looking for jobs, because I knew it would be a question that they asked, because the amount of time it takes to get to my education was much shorter on the resume. But now it doesn't. I've gotten over that as a concern.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of stigma. I think people make assumptions, but they're never going to speak them, if that makes sense. They're just going to categorize you, and if they have biases against that, maybe they're not going to give you opportunities. But it's not a blatant thing. It's going to be something that you'll never directly hear about.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And have you found kind of that you see talent recruiting and that kind of just people out in general in a different light, just because you've had a non-traditional like HR background? Because I was considered like, traditional HR people, they did human resource management in school, and then they graduate, they go into recruiting and just go all the way that way. But you were in small businesses, you were in a different industry. Do you feel that you see things in a different lens?
Well, I have a huge bias towards people that have a non-traditional path in a good way. Not in a good way, but I'm biased in favor of people that have non-traditional paths, because there's a relevancy bias or like a similarity bias there, in the sense that when I talk to somebody, they've gone through a similar path or they're choosing a different approach. Kind of what you and I have talked about. You're like, there's nothing really that I've been overly excited about from like a job title perspective. I want to create my own thing. Like there's a similar, like that resonates with me in the same sense that if somebody graduates from Waterloo and then an interviewee comes in and they're like, oh, I graduated from Waterloo as well, they're just going to hit it off and talk about the campus and talk about the cafeterias that they went to and whatever it is, that there's a people are seeking an easy way to connect with strangers, and that's sort of the easiest way. So yeah, there's definitely a similarity, or there's a similarity bias that hits me, and I'm always fascinated by that. I love the underdog story. I think just in general, society appreciates the underdog story as well, to see like, oh, this person had all the odds against them and they still succeeded anyways, as opposed to like, oh, great, good job, person that is completely set up to succeeded, great. There's nothing exciting about that. There's nothing mentally captivating about somebody that's totally set up to succeed, fully expected to. There's no surprise there. It's not unique, right? So I think people are biased towards that.
Yeah, definitely.
I trailed off there for a second.
No. But I find that when you trail off, you sometimes say like things that actually do resonate truly with you. So no, it's good.
Cool.
And your job is someone, it's all about finding the right people for the right company, for the right role. And I'm sure you do a lot of mentoring and like kind of career advising as you interview people as well. And for you personally, what motivates you to do what you do right now? And how was there like a realization, like a moment of realization where you felt that I think recruiting is the path that it's fit for me, this is what I want to do?
I think within the first few months of recruiting, I was like, this is the most fun I've had at a job ever, because I liked cold calling. I liked the idea. There was a gamified aspect to it. And in the industry I was in, it was more about picking up the phone and calling people directly, as opposed to sending them a LinkedIn message or sending them like an email. So as far as, I forgot the question, sorry.
Oh, I was going to, so it's kind of a two-part question. One was, what motivates you right now to like do this role as a recruiter? And kind of tying into that was, I guess like the realization of how you knew this was going to be like this kind of passion area, this job or role that you were going to pursue more forward.
Okay, so when I was in the industrial space, I became the guy that knew how to find the unfindable part. And I always found that really fun. So like we had this giant catalog. It was like a phone book. There's like a million different SKUs, and customers would call up and be like, oh, can I get this? And there would be a part number for it. And you'd put it into the machine, you put it in the computer, and you'd order it and it would come and whatever. But then Like once a week, every month, you'd get a customer that says like, you can get my business. Like I have all these, like, I don't want to order all that stuff that's readily available from you. I haven't been able to find this widget. If you find me this widget, I will give you all my business. That was the most exciting part. Because I would be like, cool, I'm going to be there tomorrow morning. I'm going to take a look at this weird widget. I'm going to find out how we can get this. And if I can get this for you, will you give me your business? They're like, yeah, sure, we'll talk about it. It wasn't like, yes, you're going to get the business. It's like, we'll give you a shot. So that was the most fun. When I found out that, this is going to sound terrible, but like when I found out in recruiting, that reminded me a lot of the same things. Like, I really need to find this DevOps person, or I really need to find this technical adhesive specialist to do this. And there's only 6 of them in the country, and you need to convince one of them that our company is awesome. That was really fascinating to me. So it was just sort of like, I enjoyed, like, it was a puzzle. I've always enjoyed puzzles and solving, like, how do I help people? And in recruiting, on top of that, not only do you get the opportunity to actually help people get jobs, but you also like engage with more people that don't end up getting the jobs that you're trying to pitch. So you've got this opportunity to help. How can you leave something with those individuals to say like, hey, you didn't end up getting the job. It's great to know you. Maybe we'll talk in 6 months or a year or 3 years. But as an FYI, here's some feedback from the interviews. This is what you need to work on for your next thing. And it was always really awkward, but until I found, like, when I did it a few times, I realized people came back to me like years later and be like, you know what, that really helped. And that was sort of I didn't have that with widgets. People weren't saying like, hey, remember that time you found that like really weird widget that really saved, like, yes, it was helpful. Yes, it saved them money. Yes, it, but it didn't impact them on a level that like helping another person did. And I found that really rewarding. So that's when it sort of hit. When I pieced those two things together, that's when it sort of triggered. And I was like, okay, this is fun. I can impact people's lives.
And then in terms of like what you do, what kind of activity then would you say gives you the kind of state of flow, like total engagement, immersion? Is there like a particular activity that you can just name off and go, yeah, when I do this is like my all-time favorite thing to do?
What's my all-time favorite? Having a good conversation with someone, having coffees with people, and learning about their lives. And this is weird for me. This whole experience of the last hour or so has been really weird for me because usually is the other way around. And I feel like very bad because I haven't asked you any questions. I know that's not necessarily the purpose of the podcast, but like learning about somebody's story. And it's not a state of flow, but like every once in a while you meet somebody, you interact with them, and then 6 months later somebody will reach out to you and be like, hey, do you know anybody that does X, Y, and Z? I love the idea of being the guy that's got a guy, or being the person that has a person to say, I've got somebody for that. That being resourceful. And I forget, there's a movie, I tried to find it, where like there's like a cliche stereotypical version of that prototype person, where it's like, this is the person, if you need this, go to Jimmy or something like that. That always interested me. So
like the guy that always has a guy for something.
Yeah, I got a guy.
Yeah.
So
no, I think I like you. I love having conversations with people, and so for me, this is how.
It's a good start to the morning.
Yeah,
right?
I get it.
Yeah.
And so as we kind of hit up on like the final rounds of the interview, I just had like a series of kind of end of questions I wanted to ask you. So as part of your Twitter profile, you also say that you're an aspiring eccentric billionaire.
Yeah. I changed that from millionaire to billionaire like a week ago.
Oh yeah, it's good.
I was like, I'm really limiting myself here. I don't want to put the ceiling.
James Cameron says if you reach for the stars, the heavens, you reach the moon or something.
Yeah.
And so given that kind of aspiration, what do you envision yourself kind of doing in 10 years? What would you ideally like to be doing in 10 years?
I don't really know if I'm going to bet on myself. I feel like I'm leaning towards teaching or VC. Like the VC space is really fascinating to me. I remember watching Something Ventured on Netflix. This is an incredible documentary about, San Francisco original venture capital days and how that all became, and how sort of the Wizard of Oz behind the curtains pulling the strings for companies that we all know, and how an injection of capital helped those businesses, and an injection of advice and mentorship helped those. So mentorship's always been, so if I'm connecting the dots, I'm mentoring people or teaching people something, and teaching people how to do things more efficiently and better. It involves people, it involves, new technologies, and that's where I'm going to be. I know that's where I'm going to be. What I'm going to be doing, I'm not too sure. I get kind of distracted with my interests, but I want to have my hands in everything almost. I want to be doing marketing. I want to be doing sales. I want to be doing recruiting. I want to be doing whatever the case might be. Yeah,
Yeah, and I remember reading a post you posted up about Cupid investors. There are angel investors, and we have Cupid investors.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I've been trying to get more involved in the angel investing game myself, and sometimes I think, is there a way I can get even less money?
Yeah. Well, I don't have a ton of cash to throw around at companies yet. I'm not that. So, but I still see companies that are like, if I had a ton of cash just floating around, I would totally bet on this company if I could. And there's ways to do that now, which is interesting. So.
Yeah, slowly. So we looked at kind of potentially forecasting 10 years. What about looking back now? So try to imagine yourself when you were 20 years old. So for most people, this is in like third year university, but for you, that's selling widgets. Yeah. So at that time, what kind of advice do you wish you had gotten?
What kind of advice? I feel like I like the way things have turned out so far. So it's almost like I don't wish anything was different. On a personal level, I think it would have been good for me to, not so much on the professional side, but on the personal side, I think it would have been good if I had a bit more balance in my life. So I was, maybe that is a professional thing, but like I've always been like 90% business or professional life, and then like 10% personal life. And I didn't really have a good balance. I remember it took me a while to figure out, and an interview with Fastenal's biggest competitor, Ackland's Grainger, I got to the final stage. We did this really weird like TV interview on like one of those big like TVs. It's not the flat screens, it's like the big clunky ones. Like if it fell on you, you'd probably like break something.
It has a light bulb in like the back.
Yeah. So I was talking to somebody in Vancouver, and it was like the vice president, and at the very end of the interview, like I crushed it. I did fantastic on the interview. I'm like, cool, I'm gonna leave, big blue Fastenal and go to big red Ackland's Grainger. And he asked me, so what do you do for fun? I didn't have an answer to that. So I think looking back, I would say figure out what you can do for fun. Have a balance to your life. Don't go all business. There's more to what you do there's more to life than your 9 to 5. And that I didn't end up getting the job because I was like, I'm in a band. And he's like, oh yeah, what do you play? And I started fibbing at that point because I was so panicked. I was like, I play the guitar. I'd never done any shows. I was just like hanging out with my buddies, like parents' basement, and we were playing like just stupid songs that we'd made up, and we'd never done any shows. So I kind of exaggerated that a bit, and I think he picked up on it, and I didn't end up getting a call back. So like that experience in itself was like, no, you need to have hobbies. You can't be, it was like, all I do is work. I'm the best employee ever. And they didn't have any balance to me. And I think that was why they kind of passed on me at that time. And from then on, it was like, okay, always have a hobby, always have something you're passionate about. Make room for kind of going full circle, like make room for creativity. Because I was always a creative kid. but I always lean towards like the business side of things and make room for the space that like I'm actually half decent at like photography. I'm half decent at writing and kind of exploring that side of my personality as well.
Yeah, like cultivating the empty space in
Yeah.
your life. Yeah.
Fair play. Don't fill it all with one thing.
Yeah, totally. And like I feel that all the time when I'm at the gym, like when I'm training like 4 times a week, like when I'm it's weird, like I'll just be at the gym and I'll have all these business ideas that pop up. And then so I always have like a notebook or like my Evernote beside me, and I'm just massively typing while I'm at like the squat rack, and then people probably think like, what's this guy doing? But like that's when inspiration hits, like randomly.
Okay, Google, what if we can make it to Mars in 5 years? And just like, what?
And so if that 20-year-old were to see you now, what you're doing right now at Coinsquare, what do you think the reaction from that 20-year-old Martin would be?
I think it would be a slow clap. I'm and probably like scratching my head a little bit as well. So like, what the hell is going on with the world? Cryptocurrency? Fake internet money?
It's true. A lot has changed since that time.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot for coming on the interview, Martin. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, no.
And
enjoyed it.
I'll give you a chance to kind of, advertise, or not advertise, but informationally provide information to our guests on how they could get involved with Coinsquare. Like, mainly, I guess it'd be like retail investors, like they're more younger Canadian millennials. So
for sure,
take it away.
So the easiest way is to head to coinsquare.com, create an account. If you want a referral code, there's one on my LinkedIn page. That'll get you a little extra Bitcoin in your account when you fund it after $100 worth of funding, and get started. And if you have any questions, just ping me or find us on our help page or support tickets.
Great. And this is not an investing podcast. This is purely for informational purposes.
Yeah.
Not investment advice.
Yeah, not investment advice.
Getting the disclaimers out there.
Yeah.
All right. Cool.
Awesome.
Thanks for coming on, Martin.
Yeah, no, it was a blast. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. So thanks for listening to the podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard, please check out other episodes, and don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date for the future episodes. Also, I would really appreciate it if you would leave a review on iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher, whichever is applicable to you. To see past episodes, you can go to oldmandan.com/podcasts. Also, you can sign up to my weekly newsletter on my blog, oldmandan.com/newsletter. You can stay up to date with future podcast episodes that way, and included in the newsletter are my book reviews I write, my weekly article related to the domain of self-development systems, as well as 7 things I learned throughout the week on being healthy, wealthy, and wise. Finally, special thanks to icons8.com for allowing me to use their music, Tiny People, on the podcast. Great. I will see you all next time. Take care.